Okay, everyone, for this first module, we're looking at differentiation one more time because even though you have a strong understanding of some aspects, most of you were not very familiar with or confident when thinking about how to tier lesson plans. So that's going to be our focus here. And what's essential to figuring out how to tier a lesson plan is gathering information about your students' strengths and weaknesses. So we don't want to just gather all nilly-willy, all different types of data like this cartoon suggests. It really doesn't help you. You kind of get overwhelmed. So what we're focusing on is that formative assessment cycle. If you remember, in the spring I asked you to collect one formative assessment that you used during your unit. So like it suggests here, you will have already completed step 1, correct? Now we're going to look at 2 and 3, where we're going to identify evaluation criteria and use those criteria to analyze your students' strengths and weaknesses when it comes to those specific learning goals, and then an overall sort of what conclusions can be drawn. Step 5 and 6, well, definitely 5, will happen a little bit later in this module. So right now we're focusing on 2, 3, and 4. If you recall, I gave you some directions in terms of how to choose the right type of assessment for this assignment. It should be something that everyone had an opportunity to do, but more importantly, I reiterated, and I hope you were able to identify something that was more open-ended, so that there should be no multiple choice quizzes, nothing like that, because it's very difficult for you to learn anything about what your students are thinking from a multiple choice assessment, because they can just be guessing, so you really don't know. Okay, evaluation criteria, that bullet is highlighted because that's the first thing you're going to need to do. So here's an example. Imagining that this was my learning objective. I think I shared this example already. Anyway, my learning objective. This was my assessment. The students would be making a flyer to indicate whether or not they think the United States should support the rebels in Syria, and they're also completing these sentence frames. Okay, well great. They're turning this thing in to me that they constructed, but how am I going to evaluate their level of success? So I had to identify in advance what was I looking for. I was, number one, looking for to see if they had a clear argument. Was it very almost hit you over the head obvious what stance they were taking? Did they use evidence to support it, and was the information they used accurate? So those are my 3 things that I used to evaluate my students' work. That's your first step. You're going to need to identify evaluation criteria for the formative assessment that you have copies of from your 1 class. Then you're going to read across all those assessments, which I know you probably already did once, but we're doing it with a different focus now, and collect information about how each student performed in terms of the evaluation criteria you have identified. You do not have to have 3, but I'm going to insist that you have at least 2. So there should be at least 2 types of evaluation criteria. And another thing to think about is, as you notice with mine, these are more skill-based criteria than just they were able to recall specific pieces of information. So you want to think about that when you're designing your criteria as well. After you're done and you've created your chart, you're going to write a narrative explanation of what you've learned about your class's learning. Obviously, whole class patterns in terms of strengths and weaknesses. Whoops, don't know what happened there. You want to make sure that you highlight differences within the class. Do not talk about the group of 25 or 28 or whatever it is students you have as if they're one homogeneous whole and there's no differences between them, because we all know that's not the case. Then you're also going to identify 3 focus students. You can call them student 1, student 2, student 3, whatever you want to do. And the goal is for you to be able to explain their individual strengths and weaknesses and try to make specific references back to the work samples that you have from those students. So this is your first task. So these are your next steps once you're done listening to me here. Number 1, you're going to pull out those formative assessments and identify specific criteria to evaluate the student's work. You're going to read across all their work and create a data chart using your criteria to determine areas of strengths and weaknesses for the whole class and for 3 individual students that you've identified. We're going to end up using this information to create a tiered lesson plan. More about tiering and what a tiered lesson plan is in the next screencast. For now, I just want you to focus on gathering this information and being able to write it in a short explanatory paragraph. That is it. Thank you.